American Airlines Flight 447 was falling from the sky. All three hydraulic systems had failed. The captain could not control the plane. The pilot had only minutes before crashing into the desert. Then one passenger stood up and said, "I think I know how to save this plane." Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Sarah Chen sat in seat 12C of American Airlines Flight 447, looking out the window at the bright blue sky. She was a small woman, maybe 40 years old, with black hair pulled back in a simple style. Nobody really noticed her. That was fine with Sarah. She liked being quiet. She worked as an operations manager at a large tech company in Los Angeles. Her job was to organize things, fix problems, and make sure everything ran smoothly. She did not like being the center of attention. She did not like talking in big meetings or speaking in front of crowds. She preferred working behind the scenes, where nobody had to look at her or ask her questions. Sarah had always been this way. When she was a little girl, she preferred reading books alone in her room instead of playing with other children. When she went to college, she studied engineering, but not to become a famous engineer. She wanted to understand how things worked. How systems connected. How one small thing could make other things happen. Her father was a military engineer. He had built bridges, roads, and buildings for the United States military. He taught Sarah to think carefully about every detail. If you miss one small thing, he would say, the whole building can fall down. That is why we must plan everything. Her mother was a doctor. She had also taught Sarah something important. When you help people, you do not need to talk a lot, her mother would say. You just need to think clearly and make the right decisions. That is what matters. Sarah had listened to her parents. She had learned to think carefully. She had learned to make good decisions. And she had learned that being quiet did not mean being useless. Now, at age 40, Sarah was very good at her job. She organized the construction of large buildings for her company. She made schedules. She made budgets. She solved problems that happened during construction. When something went wrong, she fixed it. When something was not organized well, she organized it better. Her boss had even offered to make her a manager of many people. But Sarah had said no. She did not want to manage people. She wanted to manage systems and projects. That was where her mind worked best. This flight from Los Angeles to New York was supposed to be simple and easy. 3 hours and 50 minutes in the air. Sarah had her laptop with her. She had work to do. She had an important spreadsheet to finish. There was a new office building in New York that her company was building. The construction was starting in 3 weeks. Sarah had planned every single detail. Which construction companies would build it, how much money they would spend. What materials would be used. What workers would do the work. What dates everything would happen. What would happen first, second, third. Every detail was organized perfectly. She had been thinking about this project for months. She had studied the building plans. She had studied the weather patterns in New York. She had studied the materials market to understand prices. She had studied similar buildings that had been built before. The other passengers on the plane barely looked at her. There was a businessman next to her in seat 12D, wearing an expensive suit and typing quickly on his phone. He looked important and busy. He looked like the kind of man who was always thinking about meetings and money. Behind Sarah was a young family with 2 children. A mother, a father, and a boy and a girl, maybe 7 and 5 years old. The children were excited about the trip. They kept asking their mother questions. When will we arrive? How high are we? Can I see New York from here? The mother and father tried to keep them calm, but they were excited. Sarah liked watching families travel. She liked seeing them happy. It reminded her that not everything in life was about work and planning. Some things were about being together and having fun. Sarah pulled out her laptop. The spreadsheet was already open. She started working on the budget for the New York building. She added numbers. She checked the numbers. She made sure everything was correct. The spreadsheet had 50 columns and 100 rows of information. Every number was important. She did not notice much else. She did not hear the conversations of the other passengers. She did not hear the sound of the engines. She did not hear the flight attendant pushing the drink cart up the aisle. She just worked quietly in her seat. The plane climbed higher and higher into the sky. Sarah watched the ground become smaller and smaller below. She drank her coffee. The flight was smooth and quiet. Exactly how she liked it. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed fine. Then at 2:47 in the afternoon, everything changed. The first sign was a small shake. Sarah looked up from her laptop. Had she imagined it? But then the plane shook again. This time it was stronger. Her coffee moved in its cup. Some coffee spilled on the white plastic cup holder. Probably just air, the businessman next to her said. He did not look worried. He did not even look up from his phone. Sometimes planes hit bumps. Nothing to worry about. This happens all the time. But Sarah felt something was wrong. She did not know why. She could not explain it. She just had a feeling in her stomach. A feeling that told her this was not normal turbulence. This was something different. The shaking got worse. Sarah gripped the armrest of her seat. Around her, other passengers started to notice. A man in front of them looked at a flight attendant with worried eyes. A woman across the aisle stopped reading her book and looked around nervously. The young mother behind them held her children closer to her body. The small boy said, "Mommy, what is happening? Why is the plane shaking?" "It is okay, sweetheart," the mother said. But her voice was not confident. Her voice was scared. Sarah could hear sounds from the plane. Strange sounds. Sounds she did not recognize. A high-pitched whine that came and went at a grinding noise from somewhere below, under the floor of the cabin. A sound like something was breaking. Then the plane started to move in a wrong way. Sarah had flown many times. She had probably flown 50 times in her life. She knew what normal flying felt like. She knew the feeling of a smooth flight. She knew the feeling of normal turbulence, when the plane bounced up and down a little bit. This was not normal. The plane was tilting. Not smoothly and slowly, like it was turning. It was tilting in a way that was shaky and jerky and wrong. It felt like the plane did not know which way to go. The businessman next to Sarah gripped his armrest very hard. His face went white. His relaxed, confident expression disappeared. "What is that?" he asked loudly. "What is happening?" The flight attendant, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, came running down the aisle. "Everyone, please remain calm," she said. "We are experiencing some turbulence. Please stay in your seats and keep your seatbelts fastened." But her voice told a different story. Her voice was scared too. Sarah did not answer the businessman. She was listening. She was thinking. She was putting the pieces together in her mind like a puzzle. A strange noise, a wrong kind of shaking, the plane tilting in a way that did not make sense, the feeling that something was not working correctly. In her mind, Sarah was remembering her college classes. She was remembering what her father had taught her about machines. She was thinking about what could make these sounds. What could make these movements. She closed her laptop carefully. She closed it slowly and placed it on the seat next to her. Then the captain's voice came through the speaker. It came from the cockpit, at the front of the plane. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morris. We are experiencing some technical difficulties. Please remain calm and stay in your seats. We are working on this problem now. The airplane went quiet for a moment. Everyone heard those words. Everyone understood what they meant. Technical difficulties. That was special language that pilots used. It meant something was wrong with the plane. It meant something had broken. It meant something was not working the way it was supposed to work. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. She could feel it in her chest. Boom 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 dot boom boom boom, fast and strong. She looked around. People were very scared now. She could see it on their faces. Fear was written clearly on every person's face around her. The mother with the children was holding the boy and girl very tightly against her body. The girl was crying quietly. A woman 2 seats ahead was praying quietly in Spanish, her eyes closed. The businessman was gripping his armrest so hard his knuckles were completely white. The color had left his hands. But Sarah was not thinking about her fear. She was thinking about the problem. What kind of problem could make the plane shake like this? What kind of problem could make these sounds? What kind of problem could make the plane move this way? She thought about what she knew. She did not know much about planes. But she knew about systems. Every machine was a system. Every system had parts that worked together. When one part broke, other parts might break too. What were the most important systems on a plane? Sarah thought about this. Engines, fuel systems, electrical systems. Control systems. The control systems were the most important. Control systems made the plane turn. Control systems made the plane go up and down. Control systems were what the pilots used to fly the plane. Most modern planes used hydraulic systems for control. Her father had explained hydraulic systems to her once. Hydraulic systems used special liquid under pressure to make things move. When you pushed on a control in the cockpit, it sent pressure through tubes to the wings and tail. The pressure moved the wings and tail. The movement of the wings and tail made the plane turn and move. If a hydraulic system was broken, the plane might move in strange ways. The controls might not work. The plane might move in directions the pilot did not want it to move. Sarah realized something. The shaking, the sounds, the strange movement. These things were telling her a story. Something was very wrong with this plane. In the cockpit at the front of the plane, Captain Morris and First Officer David Park were fighting with the controls. Captain Morris had been flying planes for 35 years. He had probably flown 10,000 flights. He had been through storms. He had been through engine fires. He had dealt with medical emergencies. He had been through many emergencies. But this was different. This was like nothing he had ever experienced. All 3 hydraulic systems are failing, David said, his voice tight with fear. His voice was shaking. All 3 systems showing pressure drop simultaneously. All 3 at the same time. Captain Morris's hands froze on the control stick. The control stick was what he used to fly the plane. It was like the steering wheel in a car, but for an airplane. That is impossible, he said. That cannot be happening. Tell me the systems again. Primary hydraulics at 20% and dropping, backup system at 15% and dropping, emergency hydraulic system showing critical pressure loss. Everything is failing, Captain. Everything. Hydraulic systems were what controlled the plane's movement. They controlled the wings, the tail, and the rudder. Without them, the plane could not be guided properly. Without them, it was just a heavy piece of metal falling from the sky. How is that possible? Captain Morris asked. His hands were still frozen on the control stick. They are completely separate systems. They use different pumps. They use different tubes. They use different power sources. There is no single point of failure that should affect all 3 at the same time. It is not possible. It is happening anyway, David said. His fingers were moving very fast over the control panel. He was trying everything. He was trying to reroute power. He was trying to find backup systems. He was trying to boost emergency hydraulic pressure. "Look at the warning lights," he said. "Look at all of these red lights. I have never seen this many red lights in my life." Captain Morris tried to turn the plane. He pulled the control stick toward his body. Nothing happened correctly. The plane did not respond the way it should respond. It felt like trying to move something that was frozen solid. Like trying to turn a steering wheel in a car that had completely broken. It felt like trying to move through mud. "I have almost nothing," he said. His voice was very calm now. Too calm. The calm of someone who understood they were in serious danger. "The controls are not responding. The plane is not responding to my inputs." He tried again, pushing the stick in different directions. The plane moved, but not smoothly. It moved in jerky, unpredictable ways. "Denver Center, this is American 447, he said into the radio. His voice was still calm, but there was stress underneath it. "We have a serious emergency. All 3 hydraulic systems are failing simultaneously. We are losing all control authority. We are losing the ability to steer this aircraft." There was a moment of silence on the radio. Then the voice from Denver Air Traffic Control came back. The controller sounded very worried. His voice was different from normal. "American 447, say your altitude and location." "We are at 20,000 feet, 100 miles east of Las Vegas. We cannot maintain altitude. We are losing hydraulic pressure in all 3 systems. The plane is becoming very difficult to control. We need an emergency landing immediately." David was reading the numbers on the gauges. The numbers told a story. A story of failure. A story of systems breaking down. A story of a machine dying. "We will not make Las Vegas," he said quietly. He was reading the numbers, understanding what they meant. Understanding what was going to happen. "We do not have enough hydraulic pressure to reach any airport. We are going to lose complete control authority before we reach Las Vegas. We will have to land somewhere else. Somewhere in the desert." But the desert below had no runways. It had rocks. It had sand. It had mountains. A commercial airplane cannot land in the desert safely. It would crash. Captain Morris looked out the window. Below him was brown and tan desert. No buildings. No runways. No safe places. Just empty land. "Send a mayday call," he said. His decision was made. "Tell them we need help now." David spoke into the radio with a steady voice, but fear was underneath the steadiness, like something growing inside him. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. American 447 declaring emergency. Catastrophic hydraulic failure. All 3 systems compromised. We are unable to maintain stable flight. We are 267 souls aboard. Request immediate assistance. We are unable to reach any airport." The words floated out into the radio frequency. They went out to all the air traffic controllers listening. They went to the military bases. They went everywhere. 2 F-16 Fighting Falcon jets were based at Nellis Air Force Base near Las Vegas. These were the fastest jets in the world. They could fly faster than the speed of sound. They could climb higher than any other airplane. They could do things that normal airplanes could not do. The base had heard the mayday call. The base commanders made a quick decision. Launch the fighters. Launch them now. Within 3 minutes, 2 F-16s were rolling down the runway. Within 5 minutes, they were in the air. The pilot of the first jet was Major Alex Rodriguez. People called him Viper, because he was fast and dangerous, like a viper snake. He had flown in combat in Afghanistan. He had flown in combat in Iraq. He had been in dangerous situations many times before. He had been shot at. He had had to dodge missiles. He had had to make split-second decisions when his life depended on it. He knew how to think fast. He knew how to stay calm when everything was dangerous. American 447, this is Viper Lead, he said into his radio. His voice was calm and professional. We have 2 F-16s out of Nellis Air Force Base. We are coming to help you. Our location is currently 40 miles southwest of your position. We will be with you in 6 minutes. In the cockpit of the 777, Captain Morris heard those words. He felt a small amount of hope. A small feeling that maybe, just maybe, they might have a chance. Fighter jets could help. They could see things from the air. They could guide him. They could be his eyes when his own plane's eyes were broken. But 6 minutes was a long time when your plane was crashing and falling toward the desert. 6 minutes could be forever. Back in the cabin, Sarah was still thinking. She was an operations manager. Her whole job was solving problems. Problems with schedules, problems with workers, problems with buildings and construction and planning. Every day she solved problems. Sometimes she solved 5 or 6 different problems in one day. This was a big problem. The biggest problem she had ever faced. But it was still a problem. And problems could be solved. That was what Sarah believed. She pulled out a piece of paper from her bag. She pulled out a pen. She started to write. She wrote down everything she could see and hear. The plane is shaking in wrong ways. The engines sound different. The plane is losing altitude. The captain said hydraulic systems are failing. The plane is not responding to the controls correctly. The plane is in the desert with no airports near. Sarah had a very good memory for details. This was one of her best skills. She could remember numbers. She could remember dates. She could remember systems and how they worked. She had studied engineering in college before she became an operations manager. Her father had taught her how machines worked. How systems were built. How one part connected to another part. She had learned about hydraulic systems. She had learned how pressure and power made things move. She had learned what happened when hydraulic systems failed. If hydraulic pressure was gone, then the pilot could not control the plane using the normal methods. The normal methods used the hydraulic system to move the wings and tail. If the hydraulics were broken, those controls would not work. So what could control a plane without hydraulics? What else could make a plane turn and move? She thought about it. Her pen moved as she wrote. Her mind was working fast. Engines. Engines could control a plane. If you changed the power of the engines differently on each side, the plane would turn. If the left engine had more power and the right engine had less power, the plane would turn to the right. It would not turn smoothly like a normal turn. But it would turn. The plane was also falling. The altitude was decreasing. To stop falling, you needed something to push back against gravity. The normal way was to pull up the nose using the control stick and hydraulics. But if hydraulics were gone, what else could slow the fall? Maybe the landing gear. The landing gear was the wheels that came down when a plane was going to land. The landing gear created something called drag. Drag was air resistance. When the landing gear came down, it pushed against the air. This created drag. Drag slowed a plane down. Drag also made a plane descend slower. Sarah wrote all of this down. She wrote it in simple language that she could understand. She wrote the ideas clearly. Then she looked at her schedule that she had been working on before. The schedule had very exact calculations. It had numbers about distances. It had numbers about angles. It had numbers about speeds. She began to make calculations. If the plane was falling at this speed, and if the engines could push with this much power, and if the landing gear created this much drag. Could a plane land? Could it land safely? Sarah did not know if she was right. But she thought she might be right. The math seemed to work. The numbers made sense. She did not have all the information. She did not know the weight of the plane. She did not know how much the engines could push. She did not know all of the exact conditions. But she knew enough to try. She looked around at the other passengers. Most of them were very scared now. Some were praying. Some were crying. Some were just sitting very still, waiting to see what would happen. A woman 2 seats ahead was holding her phone, looking at pictures. Pictures of her family, Sarah thought. Trying to remember her loved ones, trying to remember happy times. Nobody was doing anything to help. Nobody was doing anything except being scared. But Sarah had an idea. And an idea was something. Sarah stood up. Her legs were shaking a little bit, but she stood up anyway. The businessman next to her grabbed her arm very hard. His grip was strong. "What are you doing?" he said loudly. "You are crazy. You need to stay in your seat." The captain said to stay in our seats. "I have an idea," Sarah said quietly. Her voice was calm. Her voice was controlled. "I need to tell the captain. It might help." "You cannot help. You are not a pilot. You do not know anything about flying. You are going to get us all killed." Sarah pulled her arm away gently. "Maybe. But I have to try." Sarah walked toward the front of the airplane. The airplane was tilting and shaking, so she had to hold on to the seats as she walked. She had to balance herself carefully. The flight attendants were very busy. They were preparing the cabin for a crash landing. They were telling people to put their heads down. To cross their arms. To hold on to the seats in front of them. To get ready for impact. Their voices were calm, but their hands were shaking. "Excuse me," Sarah said to one of the flight attendants. Her voice was quiet, but it was clear. Her voice cut through all the noise and fear. The flight attendant turned. She looked at Sarah with shock. "Ma'am, you need to go back to your seat right now. You need to sit down immediately." "I need to speak to the captain," Sarah said. "It is very important. I may have an idea about the landing. I may have an idea about how to land this plane." The flight attendant's eyes widened. Her mouth opened a little bit. She was trying to understand what Sarah had just said. "An idea," she repeated. "I work with operations planning," Sarah said. "I understand machines and systems. I understand engineering. I think I might be able to help. The captain needs to know." The flight attendant did not know what to say. But she was looking at a woman who was calm. A woman who was not panicking and screaming like the other passengers. A woman who seemed like she knew something. A woman who seemed intelligent and serious. So she nodded. And she said, "Follow me. Be careful. The plane is very unstable." She took Sarah to the cockpit. The cockpit door was very strong, designed to keep people out. The flight attendant knocked on it carefully. The door opened. The pilot could see who it was. Sarah stepped into the cockpit. Captain Morris was there. First Officer David was there. And the scene was not good. Captain Morris did not look good. His face was red from working so hard. Sweat was all over his face, running down his temples. His hands were shaking from fighting the controls so hard. His muscles were straining. First Officer David's hands were moving fast over the control panels. His face was very tense. His jaw was clenched. "Captain, this passenger says she might have an idea about landing," the flight attendant said quickly. Captain Morris looked at Sarah like she was crazy. Like she was completely insane. "Ma'am, I do not know what you think you can do, but this is not the time for passengers to come into the cockpit. This is not the time for. The landing gear creates drag," Sarah said quickly. Her words came fast but clear. "If you deploy it now, while we are still high, it will help you descend in a controlled way. The drag will slow down the descent. And if you change the power on the engines differently on each side, you can turn the plane without using the hydraulic systems. You can use something called asymmetric thrust. You can use thrust to control direction instead of hydraulics. I have done some calculations. It might work. Captain Morris stared at her. First Officer David stared at her. There was complete silence in the cockpit. The only sounds were the alarms and the grinding of the damaged hydraulic systems. Then David said quietly, "She is right. That could actually work. I have heard of asymmetric thrust. I have read about it. Pilots have done it in simulators before. It is possible. It is very difficult, but it is possible." Captain Morris looked at the radio. Then he looked at the gauges. Then he looked at Sarah. "Do you know what you are talking about?" he asked. His voice was serious. His voice was desperate. "No," Sarah said honestly. "I do not know for sure. But I understand planning and systems. And I have studied engineering. I think this might work. The math seems right." Captain Morris made a decision. He was a man who had made good decisions for 35 years. He had stayed alive because he made good decisions. He had kept his passengers safe because he made good decisions. Now he made another decision. Sometimes in life, you have to trust someone. Even if you do not know them, even if they do not have the same training as you, even if it sounds crazy. Sometimes you have to trust someone because they are the only option you have left. "Give me the calculations," he said. Sarah pulled out the paper where she had written everything. She handed it to him with a steady hand. Captain Morris read it while still flying the plane. His eyes moved quickly over the numbers. He was reading the math. He was understanding the thinking. Landing gear came down, it pushed against the air. This created drag. Drag slowed a plane down. Drag also made a plane descend slower. Sarah wrote all of this down. She wrote it in simple language that she could understand. She wrote the ideas clearly. Then she looked at her schedule that she had been working on before. The schedule had very exact calculations. It had numbers about distances. It had numbers about angles. It had numbers about speeds. She began to make calculations. If the plane was falling at this speed, and if the engines could push with this much power, and if the landing gear created this much drag. Could a plane land? Could it land safely? Sarah did not know if she was right. But she thought she might be right. The math seemed to work. The numbers made sense. She did not have all the information. She did not know the weight of the plane. She did not know how much the engines could push. She did not know all of the exact conditions. But she knew enough to try. She looked around at the other passengers. Most of them were very scared now. Some were praying. Some were crying. Some were just sitting very still, waiting to see what would happen. A woman 2 seats ahead was holding her phone, looking at pictures. Pictures of her family, Sarah thought. Trying to remember her loved ones, trying to remember happy times. Nobody was doing anything to help. Nobody was doing anything except being scared. But Sarah had an idea. And an idea was something. Sarah stood up. Her legs were shaking a little bit, but she stood up anyway. The businessman next to her grabbed her arm very hard. His grip was strong. "What are you doing?" he said loudly. "You are crazy. You need to stay in your seat." The captain said to stay in our seats. "I have an idea," Sarah said quietly. Her voice was calm. Her voice was controlled. "I need to tell the captain. It might help." "You cannot help. You are not a pilot. You do not know anything about flying. You are going to get us all killed." Sarah pulled her arm away gently. "Maybe. But I have to try." Sarah walked toward the front of the airplane. The airplane was tilting and shaking, so she had to hold on to the seats as she walked. She had to balance herself carefully. The flight attendants were very busy. They were preparing the cabin for a crash landing. They were telling people to put their heads down, to cross their arms. To hold on to the seats in front of them. To get ready for impact. Their voices were calm, but their hands were shaking. "Excuse me," Sarah said to one of the flight attendants. Her voice was quiet, but it was clear. Her voice cut through all the noise and fear. The flight attendant turned. She looked at Sarah with shock. "Ma'am, you need to go back to your seat right now. You need to sit down immediately." "I need to speak to the captain," Sarah said. "It is very important. I may have an idea about the landing. I may have an idea about how to land this plane." The flight attendant's eyes widened. Her mouth opened a little bit. She was trying to understand what Sarah had just said. "An idea?" she repeated. "I work with operations planning," Sarah said. "I understand machines and systems. I understand engineering. I think I might be able to help. The captain needs to know." The flight attendant did not know what to say. But she was looking at a woman who was calm. A woman who was not panicking and screaming like the other passengers. A woman who seemed like she knew something. A woman who seemed intelligent and serious. So she nodded. And she said, "Follow me. Be careful. The plane is very unstable." She took Sarah to the cockpit. The cockpit door was very strong, designed to keep people out. The flight attendant knocked on it carefully. The door opened. The pilot could see who it was. Sarah stepped into the cockpit. Captain Morris was there. First Officer David was there. And the scene was not good. Captain Morris did not look good. His face was red from working so hard. Sweat was all over his face, running down his temples. His hands were shaking from fighting the controls so hard. His muscles were straining. First Officer David's hands were moving fast over the control panels. His face was very tense. His jaw was clenched. "Captain, this passenger says she might have an idea about landing," the flight attendant said quickly. Captain Morris looked at Sarah like she was crazy. Like she was completely insane. "Ma'am, I do not know what you think you can do, but this is not the time for passengers to come into the cockpit. This is not the time for. The landing gear creates drag," Sarah said quickly. Her words came fast but clear. "If you deploy it now, while we are still high, it will help you descend in a controlled way. The drag will slow down the descent. And if you change the power on the engines differently on each side, you can turn the plane without using the hydraulic systems. You can use something called asymmetric thrust. You can use thrust to control direction instead of hydraulics. I have done some calculations. It might work." Captain Morris stared at her. First Officer David stared at her. There was complete silence in the cockpit. The only sounds were the alarms and the grinding of the damaged hydraulic systems. Then David said quietly, "She is right. That could actually work. I have heard of asymmetric thrust. I have read about it. Pilots have done it in simulators before. It is possible. It is very difficult, but it is possible." Captain Morris looked at the radio. Then he looked at the gauges. Then he looked at Sarah. "Do you know what you are talking about?" he asked. His voice was serious. His voice was desperate. "No," Sarah said honestly. "I do not know for sure. But I understand planning and systems. And I have studied engineering. I think this might work. The math seems right." Captain Morris made a decision. He was a man who had made good decisions for 35 years. He had stayed alive because he made good decisions. He had kept his passengers safe because he made good decisions. Now he made another decision. Sometimes in life, you have to trust someone. Even if you do not know them, even if they do not have the same training as you, even if it sounds crazy. Sometimes you have to trust someone because they are the only option you have left. Give me the calculations, he said. Sarah pulled out the paper where she had written everything. She handed it to him with a steady hand. Captain Morris read it while still flying the plane. His eyes moved quickly over the numbers. He was reading the math. He was understanding the thinking. Captain Morris pushed the brake pedals with all his strength. Every muscle in his legs was tensing. The wheels on the desert ground started to slow the plane. Dust flew up around them. The plane was sliding across the rough ground, slowing down, slowing down. The plane was still moving fast. Too fast. There was a mountain ahead. Low but solid. They were going to crash into it. Keep braking. Sarah said. Full power. The plane slowed more. 100 miles per hour. 80 miles per hour. 60. 50 yards to the mountain. 40 yards. 30 yards. 20 yards. Everyone thought this was it. Everyone thought they were going to die. The impacts, the noise, the fear, it all came together. Then the plane stopped. The dust settled slowly around them. The engines stopped roaring. The sounds of the emergency ended. There was complete silence. It lasted for 3 seconds. 3 seconds of complete silence. Then someone screamed. A scream of fear mixed with relief. Then everyone was screaming. People were crying and laughing and holding each other. They were alive. All 267 people on the plane were alive. The businessman in seat 12D had tears running down his face. The elderly couple who had been praying were holding each other very tightly. The little children were crying, but they were alive. The mother held her children and looked up to the sky. Thank you, she said. Thank you. When the rescue helicopters arrived, they found something extraordinary. They found a plane that should have crashed but did not crash. They found smoke still coming from the tires and brakes. They found 267 people who should have died but did not die. And they found a quiet woman in the cockpit who had saved them all. The rescue workers came quickly. They helped people out of the plane onto the desert floor. Everyone was okay. Some people had bumps and bruises. The businessman had 2 broken ribs. But nobody was seriously hurt. Nobody was dead. Then the news crews came. The cameras came. The reporters came. Everyone wanted to know the story of what had happened. They interviewed Captain Morris first. His face was still red. He was still shaking from the adrenaline. But he talked clearly. There was a woman, he said. A passenger. She understood engineering. She understood systems. She gave me the idea to use asymmetric thrust. She gave me the calculations. Without her, we would all be dead. I would have crashed that plane into a mountain. Every single person on this flight would be dead. Then they found Sarah. She was sitting on the sand, away from the crowds. She was very quiet. She was looking at the plane, understanding what had just happened. Reporters pushed microphones toward her. Cameras pointed at her face. Lights flashed. How did you do this? They asked. How did you solve a problem that trained pilots could not solve? Sarah did not like the attention. She wanted to be alone. She wanted to sit quietly and think about what had happened. But she understood that people needed to know the story. So she answered quietly. I did not solve anything alone, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was clear. The captain was brilliant. The first officer was brilliant. The fighter jets guided us. The flight attendants kept people safe. And I just understood how the systems worked. I was able to see the problem and think about what might work. That was all. A reporter pushed forward. But you have no pilot training. You are just an operations manager. How did you know what to do? I understand planning, Sarah said. I understand systems. I understand that every action makes something else happen. That one thing is connected to another thing. I have studied engineering. And I was not afraid to think differently because I did not have pilot training. Maybe that helped me see a solution that seemed impossible. The captain came and stood beside Sarah. He put his hand on her shoulder. This woman saved my plane, he said loudly so all the reporters could hear. Without her, I would have crashed into that mountain. Without her calculations, we would all be dead. She is the reason 267 people are alive today. The news spread across the country like wildfire. By the next morning, every television station was talking about the story. A quiet operations manager had done something extraordinary. She had saved 267 lives by thinking clearly and remaining calm. Headlines read, "Silent Hero Saves Flight. Unknown Manager Becomes Pilot's Guide. How One Woman's Clear Thinking Saved 267 Lives." People called her a hero. News stations wanted to interview her. News magazines wanted to write about her. She became famous overnight. But Sarah did not feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had done what needed to be done. 3 months later, Sarah received a letter. It came from the United States Air Force. The letter was on Special Department of Defense paper. It was official. The letter asked her to come to a meeting. The meeting would be at a military base. Important Air Force officers wanted to talk to her. Sarah was nervous. But she went. At the meeting, she sat at a big table. Around the table were Air Force generals and officers and engineers. They looked serious and official. A general stood up. "Ms. Chen," he said, "what you did on Flight 447 was remarkable. You showed us something important. You showed us that clear thinking can solve problems that experience sometimes cannot solve. We want you to help us." "Help you how?" Sarah asked quietly. "We want you to help us train pilots," the general said. "We want you to teach pilots how to think differently. How to see problems in new ways, how to stay calm and think clearly during emergencies. We want you to help us create new training programs. We want you to help us improve emergency procedures." Sarah was shocked. "I am not a pilot," she said. "I do not know how to fly a plane." "But you know how to think," a colonel said. "You know how to solve problems. You know how to understand systems. Pilots know how to fly planes. But what we need is people who know how to think clearly when everything is wrong. That is you." Sarah thought about this. She thought about the people on Flight 447. She thought about the little children. She thought about how close everyone had come to dying. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I will help." Over the next year, Sarah created a program called Emergency Problem Solving. She taught this program to pilots at military air bases. She taught them how to think the way she thought. How to break down a problem into pieces. How to understand how all the pieces connected. How to remain calm when everything was wrong. Pilots began to understand better. They began to think differently. They began to see solutions they had not seen before. The Air Force was very happy. They expanded the program. They created training materials. They trained other people to teach the program. Sarah never became a pilot. She did not want to. She was an operations manager and a teacher. She worked behind the scenes, helping other people learn to think clearly. But her name became known. Not just in the Air Force, but all over the world. People in other countries heard about her. Airlines from other countries asked her to help train their pilots. She received letters from people who had been on Flight 447. They told her that they still thought about her. They told her that their lives had changed. Some had left jobs they did not like. Some had spent more time with their families. Some had realized that life was precious and should not be wasted on things that did not matter. The little girl who had been crying on the plane sent Sarah a drawing. It was a picture of an airplane and a woman. The woman was labeled, "My Hero." Sarah put the drawing on her office wall. It made her smile every time she saw it. The businessman who had grabbed Sarah's arm, the one who had said she was crazy, he became a philanthropist. He gave money to schools to teach young people how to solve problems. He said that Sarah had taught him something. She had taught him that quiet people could be strong. She had taught him that different ways of thinking were valuable. Sarah's company also changed. The company wanted to keep her. They gave her more money. They made her a director. But Sarah said no to the big job. She said she wanted to work on special projects. She wanted to teach others in the company how to solve problems the way she solved problems. Years passed. Sarah was still quiet. She still did not like being the center of attention. She still preferred working behind the scenes. But now, when she walked into a room, people treated her differently. People respected her. People knew that she was special. One day, Sarah was sitting in her office. A reporter came to interview her. The reporter had been trying to get an interview for 2 years. Finally, Sarah had agreed. "Tell me," the reporter said, "what is the secret? How can a quiet operations manager do what trained pilots cannot do?" Sarah thought for a long moment. She thought about Flight 447. She thought about all the times in her life that she had solved problems by thinking clearly. "I do not think there is a secret," she said finally. "I think people believe that quiet people are weak. That quiet people cannot lead. That quiet people cannot make important decisions. But quiet people listen. Quiet people think. Quiet people see things that loud people miss." She paused. "When I was on that plane," she continued, "everyone around me was scared. Everyone was panicking. But I was quiet. And because I was quiet, I could think. I could hear the sounds of the plane. I could understand the problem. I could focus." "But that is just you," the reporter said. "You are special." "No," Sarah said. "I am not special. I am just a person who paid attention. I just a person who understood that I could help. Every person can do what I did. Every person can solve problems if they stay calm. If they think clearly. If they listen." She looked at the reporter carefully. "The real message," she said, "is that you do not need to be loud to be important. You do not need to talk all the time to be smart. You do not need to be the center of attention to change things. Sometimes the most important things happen quietly. Sometimes the loudest voice is not the one that makes the biggest difference. Sometimes a quiet mind that is thinking clearly is more powerful than 1,000 loud voices." The reporter wrote down everything Sarah said. That article was read by millions of people. It appeared in newspapers and magazines around the world. Teachers started to use Sarah's story in their classes. They taught students about her. They told students that quiet people could be heroes too. Young people read about Sarah and felt brave. They felt like maybe their quiet voice mattered. Maybe their clear thinking mattered. Parents read about Sarah and stopped pushing their quiet children to be more outgoing. They realized that quiet was okay. Different was okay. Many years later, Sarah was invited to speak at a big conference. It was a conference for business leaders and managers and engineers from all over the world. There were thousands of people. Sarah was nervous. She did not like public speaking. She did not like big crowds. But she went anyway. She walked to the stage. The lights were very bright. The crowds were very large. But Sarah was calm. She spoke quietly. The room had to be very silent to hear her. And the room was silent. Everyone wanted to hear what she had to say. "I was just a quiet woman," she said. I was just a person who liked to work behind the scenes. I was just someone who thought carefully about problems. I did not know that I could do something important. I did not know that my quiet thinking could help anyone. She paused and looked out at all the people. But then one day, I was on a plane. And everything went wrong. And I realized that I could help. I realized that maybe my quiet thinking was a gift. Maybe my calm mind was something valuable. Maybe I could make a difference. So I want to tell you something, she said. If you are quiet, that is okay. If you are not the person who talks the most in meetings, that is okay. If you think before you speak, that is okay. Because those people, the quiet people who think clearly, sometimes they are the ones who change everything. The world needs loud people, she continued. The world needs people who talk and lead and inspire. But the world also needs quiet people. The world needs people who think. The world needs people who pay attention to details. The world needs people who solve problems by thinking clearly. So do not try to be someone you are not, she said. Be who you are. If you are quiet, be quiet and proud. Be quiet and smart. Be quiet and strong. The room was completely quiet. Then people began to clap. They clapped for a long time. Sarah stood there, feeling embarrassed, but also feeling good. Feeling like maybe her message mattered. Feeling like maybe her story could help others. Sarah went back to her quiet life. She continued her work. She continued to teach. She continued to help people solve problems. But her message spread. It spread through schools and companies and families all over the world. Years and years later, a young girl read about Sarah. The girl was quiet. The girl did not like talking in class. The girl felt like she was not smart because she was quiet. But she read Sarah's story. And she realized that quiet could be strong too. She realized that thinking carefully was a gift. That girl grew up. She became an engineer. She solved problems. She changed things. And she always remembered Sarah's story. That girl was not alone. Thousands of young people read about Sarah. Thousands of quiet people realized that they could make a difference too. That was Sarah's real gift. Not just saving 267 people on one plane. But showing the world that quiet people matter. That clear thinking matters. That you do not need to be loud to change things. Sarah Chen remained an operations manager. She remained quiet. She did not become a famous person on purpose. But her quiet mind and clear thinking saved 267 lives on one day. And her story changed the world. It showed that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is think clearly and stay calm. That sometimes being quiet is a strength, not a weakness. That sometimes the person who saves the day is the person nobody was paying attention to. It was not loud. It was not flashy. It was not what anyone expected. But sometimes the most important things in life happen quietly, in calm voices, by people who simply know how to solve problems and have the courage to try. And that is the real magic of Sarah Chen's story. That is why people remember her. That is why her name will never be forgotten.